Hi and welcome back to Garden Ninja. Now today's the third episode in my wildlife garden design series, and I'm going to be showing you some of the shrubs and herbaceous perennials that I'm going to be growing and planting in the wildlife based garden. So come on, let's get cracking. Now the sun is out, it's cracking the flags and it's red hot, and I want to give you an update on the wildlife friendly garden because in the past week or two I've been planting out a number of really interesting shrubs. And the reason why I've been planting shrubs in this garden is to give that mid layer of height. So you'll have seen in the other episodes how I've planted the trees, which are going to give a huge canopy and give height to the garden. They're going to lock up carbon and provide an environment for wildlife. But we've also got to consider that mid layer for things like birds and mammals, and also to give it a bit of bulk. So let's take a look at some of the shrubs that I've recently planted in the wildlife garden. And conveniently, just down here, we've got this, which is a Guelder rose, also known as the Viburnum opulus. Now, it's a UK native shrub, and it looks absolutely tiddly down here, and I'll do a close-up. But over time, it's going to grow up, probably in about 4 meters width. So it will get big. However, you can keep on top of this relatively easy with a bit of winter hard pruning and keep it under control. So it is suitable for a smaller garden. However, you're going to have to be fairly confident in pruning it. But it does show you what you can do using native shrubs, and it's probably going to fill this entire space over time, which means less mowing for me, more diversity for wildlife, and it's going to give a real punch to the beginning of the garden. It has white flowers in spring that look a little bit like a hydrangea, though hydrangea specialists will probably slap me on the wrist for comparing the two. Then in the autumn it has bright red berries that will then feed the wildlife. So it's basically like an all-you-can-eat buffet, and it's going to look gorgeous. Let's move on and have a look at some of the other shrubs. Down here we've got a blackthorn, or Prunus spinosa, and it was one of the very first berry trees, stroke shrubs, that I ever planted years and years ago when I started to garden as a young child. Now the blackthorn has many different uses, it's got loads of stories, and in sort of folklore it was used by witches and people in witchcraft to make wands out of. So it's got like a really interesting story behind it. They can live for up to 100 years, so I really am planning for the future here. It will grow massive. It will get to about 7 meters tall over time. They look really gnarled. You probably never really need to prune them. They will provide sloes in the autumn, which you may know from sloe gin. They provide all sorts of beneficial environments for wildlife. You really don't have to do much with them once they get established. You can keep them relatively neat, and I'm going to show you one in a minute that I've managed to keep to about 1/2 meter tall. I'll explain a bit more about that later on, but for now this is at the very edge of the boundary, so I'm going to be planting this for growth. I want it to get big, to fill out, and to sort of take up a big chunk of this area. So what's next? Now a bit further over here we have our first rose of the group. Very nice. Now this down here, if I bend that a bit, is a dog rose, Rosa canina. Now it looks tiny, but they are super tough. Unlike regular roses where you have to prune a lot and give lots of feed to, I've always noticed with these that they are pretty tough. They're a hedgerow plant, so they're meant to be. They get these gorgeous pale pink and white flowers, rose hips in the autumn, super tough once they get established. And this little lady down here is probably going to get to about this high in about 4 years' time. I'll probably prune it to encourage it to stay bushy and dense, but you can just let them go pretty much rampant. But again, that's on the exit of one of the paths near the seating area, because you're then going to get all that beautiful perfume from the flowers of the dogwood. So now that the trees are in, I need to map out the design. Now the best way that I find in doing this on a larger design like this is by using canes. So I'm going to map out both the path and the position of the shrubs and the boundary, and then I can use string to line between the canes of the path, which will show me the width and the direction of the path and will help me visualise the design here on the ground. And then I can walk through that, and when I do that I'll be able to see if all my measurements work out. If there are pinch points or parts of the path that aren't quite wide enough or don't quite sit correctly, I can adjust them. And it's far easier to adjust these than it is to start digging things up and moving things around. So for the next step, I'm going to use a really long piece of string and twine it around the canes to map out the path. So I've finished linking up all the canes, and I'm now going to walk you through the path in the garden. So you're going to be kind of in reverse, I'm looking head on at this path. It's going to weave its way through, and I've made it wide enough that I can fit my mower through so it's not too much drama, and that two people can snugly walk side by side, almost like a little bit romantic, before we get to some of the more open areas like this. So in this small area, and you're going to have to use your imagination for the time being, we've got a circular, almost rest point, and I'm probably going to put a little bench in here. The planting is going to bring this in and make it feel really snug. So although we've got these paths through the garden, we need places to rest and take retreat, and we talked about that last time. So this is the first one, it's the smallest area of rest. Then we follow the path through, it's going to start weaving again. We've got loads of spaces for me to be able to plant up and to leave wild for nature to come and take over. We're going to weave through again, another dog's leg, and this is kind of going to be the main central hub of the garden. We're in the next circle, so I'll do a little spin. And if you can see all these canes behind me, hopefully the light levels aren't too bad, but this is going to be like the big mama seating area. So I'm probably going to try and use some of the trees that were felled recently and use the logs as seating. Probably going to put some larger bug hotels and sort of features, wildlife features up this end, and what that will do is pull your attention through, because you're going to get glimmers of those as you're walking through the garden. But when you get here, there's loads of space, so we could have maybe 5, 6, 10 people sat round here on picnic blankets enjoying the wildlife garden, and it's a real focus. And then once we move on from here, we go back into the path again. We're going to weave through before coming to the end of the garden. So I mentioned some of the herbaceous perennials that I'm going to be growing to help supplement the garden. So let's go to the greenhouse and have a look at a few of those specimens now. So let's go into the greenhouse and have a look at the herbaceous perennials that I'm growing for the wildlife garden. So behind me down here, we've got a tray full of toadflax seedlings. Now they are a perennial wildflower meadow flower. They have little yellow and orange, almost like snapdragon style flowers. Now they will quite happily outcompete certain grasses, which is great. That's what I want. I want flowers to take over and the grasses to be kind of on the back foot. They do spread quite quickly through runners, so they're probably not the best idea if you've got a small garden, but for that size they'll be absolutely fine. But there are plenty of other plants that aren't going to take over that you can even use in a small garden, and Achillea is one of them. Also known as yarrow, you'll find it in verges and fields all over the UK. Now you've got the bright yellow varieties with almost the silvery leaves that you see in garden centres, but there's also the sort of more primitive white version. And they're absolutely gorgeous. They have what we call umbels of flowers. They're an umbellifer. So they're basically like a massive buffet, like a plate full of flowers for insects and wildlife. And they're relatively well behaved. Now what you could do is start to pop in some Achillea plants into the edges of your wildflower meadow to give that instant pop of colour and some flower without having to go to all the drama of trying to sow an annual meadow, which is going to take lots of effort and lots of mowing every single year. So we've got the Achillea, we've got toadflax, we've got other species, like we've got Jacob's ladder. I think I'm growing some El Campaign, which is almost similar to a Helena, like a big daisy-like flower that again will take over and quite happily self-seed itself throughout the wildflower meadow. So they're just a few samples of the plants that I'm growing. But if you want to find out more about plants that are suitable for small gardens to give that wild and woody look, then just get in touch in the comments below and I'll be happy to help. So that brings us to the end of the third episode of the Wildlife Garden. So what are we going to be doing next? Well, I need to keep this area mown and I need to remove the grass. And the reason for that is it's a really fertile area. And wildflowers and native meadows need rather poor soil. So I'm going to keep mowing it. I'm going to mow the path even shorter, so that's distinct, but I'm going to remove the clippings. And in a few weeks, once my seedlings get big enough, I'm going to start to plant out some of those herbaceous perennials so they can start to get established, ready for next year. If you've liked this video, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel where I've got over 100 garden design hints, tips and hacks to help you make your garden awesome, no matter what size. If you've got a question about wildlife gardening or garden design, pop a comment down below and make sure you subscribe. I've been Garden Ninja. Happy gardening.